Welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us today. We're diving deep into A Course in Miracles, and if you're just joining our community, you might be wondering what this course is all about. I'd love to invite you to check out the very first video on this channel, where I break down exactly what A Course in Miracles is, how it came to exist, and why it's been transforming lives for over 5 decades. It'll give you the perfect foundation for everything we explore together here. Now, let me ask you something that might hit a little too close to home. How much of your mental energy each day is consumed by worry, anxiety, or some form of conflict? Maybe it's that ongoing tension with a family member that never seems to resolve. Perhaps it's the constant stress about money, your career, or your relationships. Or it could be that nagging internal voice that keeps telling you you're not good enough, not doing enough, not being enough. If you're honest with yourself, you might realize that fear and conflict aren't just occasional visitors in your life. They're practically permanent residents. Here's what's fascinating and deeply troubling at the same time. We live in the most materially abundant time in human history, yet anxiety disorders, depression, and interpersonal conflict are at all-time highs. We have more ways to connect than ever before, yet we feel more isolated and defensive. We have access to more information about peace and healing than any generation before us, yet we seem to be in a constant state of internal and external warfare. What's going on here? The answer, according to A Course in Miracles, lies in something most of us have never really examined: the intricate relationship between fear and conflict. We tend to think of these as separate issues, fear as an internal emotional state, and conflict as something that happens between us and others. But what if I told you that they're actually two sides of the same coin? What if the conflicts you experience in your relationships, your workplace, even your own mind, are all symptoms of a much deeper fear that you might not even realize you're carrying? Today we're going to explore Chapter 2, Section 7 of the course, Fear and Conflict. This isn't just academic study. This is about understanding the very mechanics of human suffering and, more importantly, discovering how to break free from patterns that have been running your life from behind the scenes. Because here's the thing, most of us are so accustomed to living in fear and conflict that we've convinced ourselves it's just the way life is. We've accepted anxiety as normal, drama as inevitable, and peace as something reserved for people who don't live in the real world. But what if that's completely backwards? What if the real world is actually one of peace, love, and harmony, and the world of fear and conflict is the illusion we've collectively agreed to believe in? What if every argument you've ever had, every worry that's ever kept you up at night, every moment you've felt attacked or defensive, has been based on a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reality itself? The Course teaches us something that initially sounds almost too simple to be true. Fear is not real. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just spiritual bypassing or positive thinking nonsense, stay with me. The Course isn't saying that the experience of fear isn't real. It's saying that what we're afraid of is ultimately an illusion. And once we understand this at a deep level, everything changes. Our relationships transform, our inner peace becomes unshakable, and conflicts begin to dissolve before they even fully form. But here's what makes this particularly relevant for our current moment in history. We're living in a time when fear-based thinking has become weaponized. We're constantly being told what to be afraid of, who to see as threats, and why we need to be perpetually vigilant and defensive. The media, social networks, even well-meaning friends and family members seem to have an endless supply of reasons why we should be worried, angry, or in conflict with someone or something. Understanding the teachings in this section isn't just about personal peace. It's about reclaiming your power to choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and peace over the addictive drama of conflict. It's about becoming someone who can remain centered and loving even when the world around you seems to be losing its mind. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into some profound truths that could completely transform how you experience life. Understanding the nature of fear. Let me start with a question that might surprise you. What if everything you think you know about fear is wrong? What if fear, which feels so real and immediate when you're experiencing it, is actually the world's most convincing magic trick? I know that sounds crazy, especially when your heart is pounding from anxiety or when you're lying awake at 3 a.m. worrying about something that might happen. But stick with me, because understanding the true nature of fear is the key to unlocking a level of peace you might have thought was impossible. According to A Course in Miracles, there are only two fundamental emotions in the universe: love and fear. Everything else, anger, jealousy, sadness, anxiety, depression, these are all just different costumes that fear wears to disguise itself. But here's the revolutionary part. While love is real and eternal, fear is essentially a hallucination. It's a trick of perception that makes illusions seem threatening and separation seem real. Think about this for a moment. When you're truly afraid, what are you actually afraid of? If you dig deep enough, you'll find that all fear ultimately comes down to one thing: the fear of not existing, of being annihilated, of losing your sense of self. But the Course teaches us something profound. The self that you think can be threatened isn't your real self at all. Your true self, your spiritual essence, your connection to divine love, can never be harmed, threatened, or destroyed. It's literally impossible. So why does fear feel so real? This is where it gets really interesting. Fear exists because we believe in separation. We believe we're separate from God, separate from each other, separate from love itself. This belief in separation creates what the Course calls the ego. That voice in your head that's constantly scanning for threats, always trying to protect something that doesn't actually need protection. The ego is like a security guard protecting an empty vault. It takes its job very seriously, but there's nothing valuable inside that can actually be stolen. Yet this security guard, your ego, keeps you in a constant state of vigilance, always looking for the next threat, the next thing to worry about, the next person who might hurt you or take something from you. But here's what's fascinating. We're actually addicted to fear. I know that sounds insane. Who would choose to be afraid? But think about it. How much time do you spend watching the news, scrolling through social media, gossiping about drama, or even watching horror movies and thrillers? We're drawn to fear like moths to a flame because, in a weird way, fear makes us feel alive. It gives us a sense of purpose, something to fight against, something to overcome. The ego loves this because it keeps you focused on the illusion rather than remembering your true nature. Every time you get caught up in fear, you're essentially agreeing with the ego that the separation is real, that you are vulnerable, and that love isn't powerful enough to protect you. But here's the beautiful truth that changes everything. When you recognize fear for what it really is, a call for love, everything shifts. That person who cuts you off in traffic and makes your blood boil? They're afraid. That family member who always seems to push your buttons? They're afraid. That critical voice in your own head that never seems satisfied? It's afraid. Fear is always a cry for love. It's someone, including yourself, saying, I feel separate, I feel alone, I feel threatened. And I need to remember that I'm loved and safe. When you start seeing fear this way, instead of getting defensive or angry, You can respond with compassion. Instead of adding more fear to the situation, you can bring love. This doesn't mean you become naive or put yourself in dangerous situations. It means you learn to distinguish between practical caution and the ego's paranoid fantasies. It means you start recognizing that most of what you're afraid of exists only in your imagination. Are you ready to see through the illusion? How fear creates conflict now. That we understand what fear really is, let's talk about what happens when we don't recognize it for the illusion it is. This is where things get really messy, because unrecognized fear doesn't just stay quietly inside us. It explodes outward and creates conflict everywhere it goes. And here's the kicker. Most of us have no idea that we're the ones creating the very conflicts we complain about. Here's how the mechanism works, and once you see this, you'll never look at arguments the same way again. It starts with fear. That gnawing sense that something is wrong, that you're not safe, that you're under threat. But instead of recognizing this fear for what it is, your ego does something incredibly sneaky. It projects that fear outward and blames someone else for how you're feeling. Think about the last time you had a real conflict with someone. I'm talking about one of those heated arguments where you felt completely justified in your anger. Now, if you're really honest with yourself, what were you actually afraid of in that moment? Maybe you were afraid of being wrong, of looking foolish, of losing control, of not being respected or loved. But instead of acknowledging that fear, you probably focused on what the other person was doing wrong, how they were attacking you, how unreasonable they were being. This is projection in action. And it's one of the ego's most effective tools. By making the problem about someone else, you never have to face your own fear. You get to be the victim, they get to be the villain, and the real issue, your internal fear, never gets addressed. It's brilliant, really, except that it keeps you trapped in endless cycles of conflict. But here's what's really wild. The person you're in conflict with is doing exactly the same thing. They're projecting their own unrecognized fears onto you, making you the problem, so they don't have to face what's really going on inside them. So you have two people, each convinced that the other person is the source of the problem, each completely blind to their own role in creating the mess. This is why conflicts never really get resolved through argument. You can win the debate, prove your point, get the other person to admit they were wrong, but the underlying fear is still there. So the same conflict just shows up again later. Maybe in a different form, maybe with a different person. But it's essentially the same energy playing out over and over again. The Course teaches us something that might shock you. There is no such thing as external conflict. All conflict is internal conflict projected outward. That difficult boss who makes your life miserable, that's your own self-criticism reflected back at you. That family member who never seems to approve of anything you do, that's your own fear of not being good enough. Showing up in human form to teach you something about yourself. Now, I'm not saying that other people don't have their own issues or that you should blame yourself for everything. What I'm saying is that the emotional charge you feel, the way their behavior affects you, that's always about something unhealed in your own psyche. People can only trigger what's already inside you. Here's a perfect example. Have you ever noticed how the same behavior from different people affects you differently? Maybe interrupting is something that drives you absolutely crazy when your spouse does it, but you barely notice when your best friend does the exact same thing. That's because it's not really about the interrupting. It's about what the interrupting means to you, what fear it activates, what old wound it touches. The ego loves conflict because it reinforces the illusion of separation. Every argument, every disagreement, every moment of tension seems to prove that you and others are indeed separate, that your interests are in opposition, that there's not enough love, respect, or resources to go around. Conflict makes separation feel real and justified. But what if I told you that conflict is actually optional? What if every single conflict in your life is a choice you're making, usually unconsciously, but a choice nonetheless? This might sound like victim blaming, but it's actually the most empowering news you could ever hear. Because if you're creating the conflict, that means you can also choose to stop creating it. The moment you recognize that conflict is just fear wearing a disguise, everything changes. Instead of trying to win the argument, you can address the fear. Instead of defending your position, you can look for the love underneath the attack. Instead of making enemies, you can create opportunities for healing. This is where the real transformation begins, and it's what we'll explore in our final chapter, transforming fear into love. Here's where everything we've discussed comes together into something absolutely life-changing. Now that you understand that fear is an illusion and that conflict is just projected fear, the question becomes, how do you actually break free from these patterns that have been running your life? How do you transform decades of conditioning and step into a completely different way of being? The answer is simpler than you might think, but it requires a fundamental shift in how you see your role in every situation. Instead of asking, how can I win this? Or how can I protect myself? Or how can I prove I'm right? You start asking a completely different question. How can I bring love to this situation? This isn't about becoming a doormat or letting people walk all over you. It's about becoming so internally secure that you don't need to defend an ego that isn't even real. The Holy Spirit, that voice for love, within you has a completely different perspective on fear and conflict than your ego does. While the ego sees every situation as a potential threat requiring defense, the Holy Spirit sees every situation as an opportunity for healing and connection. Where the ego wants to attack, the Holy Spirit wants to understand. Where the ego wants to be right, the Holy Spirit wants to be happy. Where the ego wants to separate, the Holy Spirit wants to join. But how do you access this Holy Spirit perspective when you're in the middle of a heated argument or consumed by anxiety? The first step is learning to interrupt the fear-conflict cycle before it takes over completely. This requires what I call the sacred pause. That moment when you feel yourself getting triggered, when you notice fear or anger rising, and instead of immediately reacting, you stop and ask yourself, what am I really afraid of right now? This simple question can transform everything because it shifts you from unconscious reaction to conscious choice. Maybe you're afraid of being abandoned, of not being good enough, of losing control, of being seen as foolish. Whatever the fear is, once you name it, you can address it directly instead of projecting it onto someone else. The next step is perhaps the most revolutionary. You choose peace over being right. This doesn't mean you don't have opinions or that you never speak up for yourself. It means you recognize that your peace of mind is more valuable than winning any argument. It means you'd rather be happy than right, loving than justified, connected than superior. This is where forgiveness becomes your superpower, but not forgiveness as the world understands it. The Course teaches us about true forgiveness, the recognition that whatever happened was based on fear and illusion, and therefore never actually happened to your real self. You're not forgiving someone for what they did to you. You're recognizing that in reality, nothing was actually done to you at all. This might sound impossible when you're dealing with real hurt or genuine betrayal. But remember, forgiveness isn't about condoning bad behavior or pretending something didn't happen. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment and fear. It's about recognizing that holding on to anger and conflict only hurts you, not the other person. Here's a practical approach that can transform your relationships immediately. When someone seems to be attacking you, instead of defending yourself, get curious about their fear. What are they really afraid of? What do they need to feel safe and loved? When you approach conflict from this perspective, you'll be amazed at how quickly situations de-escalate and how often supposed enemies become allies. Creating safety through love instead of control is perhaps the most advanced spiritual practice there is. Most of us try to feel safe by controlling our environment, our relationships, our circumstances. But the Course teaches us that real safety comes from knowing that nothing can actually threaten who you really are. When you know this at a deep level, you can remain peaceful even in chaotic situations. You become a source of calm in the storm instead of adding to the turbulence. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean you'll never feel fear or experience conflict again. What it means is that you'll recognize these experiences more quickly for what they are. Opportunities to choose love over fear, connection over separation, peace over drama. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it's contagious. When you stop feeding the fear-conflict cycle with your own reactions, when you respond to attack with love and to fear with understanding, you give others permission to do the same. You become a healing presence in the world, someone who helps others remember their own capacity for love and peace. This is how the world actually changes, not through winning arguments or defeating enemies, but through individuals who choose to see beyond illusions and respond from love. The choice is always yours, in every moment, in every interaction. Will you choose fear or love? As we come to the end of our exploration of fear and conflict, I want you to take a moment to really absorb what we've discovered together. We've unveiled one of the most fundamental illusions that keeps humanity trapped in suffering, the belief that fear is real and that conflict is inevitable. But now you know the truth. Fear is nothing more than a call for love in disguise, and conflict is simply projected, fear that can be transformed the moment you choose to see it differently. We've learned that fear isn't actually about external threats. It's about the ego's desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of separation. We've seen how unrecognized fear automatically creates conflict through projection, turning our internal struggles into external battles with others. And most importantly, we've discovered that we have the power to break this cycle by choosing love over fear, understanding over judgment, and peace over the temporary satisfaction of being right. The beauty of these teachings is that they're not just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools you can use right now, today, in whatever situation you're facing. You don't need years of training or perfect spiritual understanding. You just need the willingness to see things differently and the courage to choose love when your ego is screaming for attack. I want to thank you for taking this journey with me, for being open to ideas that challenge everything our culture teaches us about conflict and relationships. The fact that you've stayed with me through this entire exploration tells me something important about you. You're ready to step out of the matrix of fear and into the reality of love. You're ready to become someone who brings peace instead of adding to the chaos. Now here's what I want you to do. Don't let this just be another video you watched and forgot about. Pick one relationship in your life where there's ongoing tension or conflict, and commit to applying what we've learned here. The next time you feel triggered by this person, pause and ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? Then choose to respond from love instead of fear. Watch what happens. I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Share a story about a time when you chose love over fear, or tell us about a situation where you recognized fear masquerading as something else. Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to take their next step toward freedom. If this video has opened your eyes to a new way of seeing fear and conflict, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're going to continue diving deep into these life-changing teachings from A Course in Miracles, always focusing on practical application that you can use in your daily life. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with fear or stuck in conflict patterns. You never know whose life you might transform by sharing these insights. For those ready to go even deeper, check out our previous videos in this series where we explore the foundations of separation, the role of miracle workers, and the principles that can transform your entire approach to spirituality and relationships. Remember, you are not a victim of your fears or your conflicts. You are a powerful spiritual being who has simply forgotten your true nature. Every moment offers you a new opportunity to choose love over fear, peace over conflict, truth over illusion. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your willingness to grow, and thank you for choosing to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Until next time, keep choosing love over fear and watch your world transform.